Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege of introducing to you, this is the We Are All Treaty People webinar. Welcome, and we're going to begin. We'd like to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you have any questions at the end of the webinar, we'll open up the line to have that discussion. But for now, we'll stay on mute. And if you have any questions, please flag us in the chat pod, and we will be able to come back to you at the end of the webinar. So, and if you have any technical difficulties, we can support you there as well, as Suzanne Stevenson is on the line with us today and will be our technical support. So welcome. On behalf of the SE Health First Nations Inuit and Métis program team, I would like to welcome you to the first of a series of webinars and knowledge sharing events that will focus on supporting SE Health leaders of impact to better understand First Nations, Inuit and Métis culture, history, and the impacts on well-being. On this journey, we hope that you will be inspired by the stories and knowledge shared and tasked with the desire to share what you've learned with others. My name is Doris Warner, and I'm an engagement liaison with the First Nations Inuit Métis program for the past 8 years. I have the honor of being your host today for the webinar, along with my colleague, Suzanne Stevenson. Suzanne is also an engagement liaison for the past 8 years. And Suzanne will be providing us with technical support for the webinar today, so I know we're all in good hands. Suzanne, would you like to say hello and let people know how they can reach you?
Sure, thanks, Doris. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing really well this morning. And if you need any help, please contact me in the chat. You'll find that right at the bottom of the gray panel on the right side of your screen.
Great, thank you. So the SE Health First Nations Inuit Métis program is a key initiative of the St. Elizabeth Foundation, and it's a shining example of how we live out the vision of honoring the human face of healthcare. Through partnership and collaboration for nearly 20 years, we have worked with First Nations Inuit Métis communities and organizations to enhance, support, mobilize, and spread community-driven solutions for health and well-being. First and foremost, we're committed to creating and maintaining meaningful partnerships and continue to be inspired by the strength, resiliency, and passion of our community partners. It is our belief that First Nations Inuit Métis communities have the solutions to addressing their challenges, which is why the program is so deeply rooted in the values of from community for community. And to learn more about the First Nations Inuit Métis program, at the end of the webinar, we'll provide you a link. Of course, you can also connect through the SE Health website. I have the privilege today of introducing our presenters. Marnie Vermette is an Anishinaabe Kwe registered nurse that belongs to the Lac Seul First Nation and lives in Red Lake. She has spent most of her career working in the North and has extensive experience in developing, planning, and facilitating education initiatives with a focus on ensuring consideration of culturally safe approaches. Marnie is guided by the continual teachings received from elders in her community. The most important lesson she learned while working in the northern remote communities is that every community is unique, with varying customs, traditions, and protocols. Therefore, to work effectively in a community, it is essential to take time to build relationships. Our other presenter is Karen Danenman, and she is an Anishinaabe Kwe and a resident of Nameksaping, Canada. Karen is committed to education for all people and all ages. Her work focuses on the use of learning traditional knowledge on the land. She works as a trapper in the area where her mother's family has lived since time before memory. She is a head instructor for Treaty 3 Trapper Education and is a member of the Treaty 3 Trapper Steering Committee. One of her priorities is the remembering of her home community, which has been fractured and dismembered for the past 80 years by residential school system, the child welfare system, industry, alcoholism, institutional religion, lateral violence, etc. Karen is proud to say that she has never graduated for convention education, not high school, not university. Her education comes from the land and from her people, her mother, grandparents, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, cousins, her daughters, and her son, and her 5 grandchildren, who constantly inspire and energize her to provide ways to keep alive the teachings, language, values, and practices of her ancestors. We're so grateful to have you both here today. Miigwech to both of you. They both Marnie and Karen hold special places in the First Nation program, First Nations Inuit Métis program team. Karen is a precious elder to us, and Marnie is one of our former colleagues. You might recognize Marnie today in her voice and in hearing her from her previous work with SE Health. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you. Suzanne is going to share this, take back the screen and hand it over to you, Marnie and Karen, and thank you again so much for being here.
Hey, well, welcome everybody. Just going to put our slideshow up. Can you see it okay, Doris?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, first of all, I'd like to start off the presentation by introducing myself and my spirit name. So, Okitchitap and Ansikway. I live in Red Lake, as Doris mentioned, but my ancestral home is in Nemek'Tepeng in Trout Lake. I'd also like to acknowledge the land we are on here today, which is the traditional territory of Treaty 3. Also wanted to let you all know that my mom and I, so we are a mother-daughter team this morning, smudged in hopes that what we're sharing with you today will inspire you to learn more about the Indigenous people of your area as well as Canada. Also would like you to think about, as we're going through the presentation, that this is a very short snippet of the content and information. So really hoping that this will inspire you to look more into the information. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Pleasure. My English name is Karen. My Anishinaabe name is Miigwech. I'm ex-Indian Dunji, with this American Duodin. So I just told you where I'm from, Trout Lake, and also my clan is the Whitefish clan. And I'm honored to be here, and I am hoping that our webinar will be a beginning of really good relationship building. You go ahead.
So as we begin, just thinking about what are treaty rights. So many people think that treaty rights, many people think of treaty rights as special Indigenous rights. However, most people living in Canada are treaty people with their own set of rights and responsibilities. The existence of treaties is proof that the first settlers of what is now Canada respect First Nations as sovereign people and negotiated nation to nation.
This information has been excluded from most educational systems, and we are determined to put it back into all disciplines, and starting with knowing what treaty rights are and dismantling the misconceptions of what treaty rights are.
So as we go through the webinar today, I'd like you to really think about your home, your family, your community. So have that in the back of your mind as we go through these slides. We have a map up here now, and it's of the treaty areas in Canada. So based on this map and where you're currently located, I'm going to give you access to the highlighter. So if you could, I think you already do, but if you could all put a little circle on the map from a map on where you're joining from today, so that you can really see what treaty area you're currently in. So I believe I've given everybody access. So go ahead and start putting a little circle on the map.
You
People
may
just
need
have
to.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Marnie, you may need to also set it to highlighter rather than non.
Yeah, I did.
There we go. Perfect. Thanks.
And people just need to choose from that little drop down, the highlighter there. There you go. Awesome.
So there are how many participants?
21.
Are we done with marking our area?
I think so.
Yep,
Okay.
looks like it.
So just looking at this map, there are some gray areas on this map of Canada, and that represents parts where there were no treaties made. Okay, all the other areas that are in color, in brighter colors, those are actually treaty areas.
Okay, thank you for showing that, for marking down where you're joining from. I'm just going to, now I see my little arrow here. Now I'm putting little arrows or dots all over because I'm trying to advance my screen. 1 second, please.
Yeah, if you select non-drawing mode, it should go. There we go.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is a treaty? So treaties are a foundational part of Canadian society. Every road, house, building, or business that exists today in a treaty area was made possible because of a treaty. A treaty is an agreement about sharing land and establishing mutually beneficial relationships.
Often treaties are viewed as being outdated, but that is not the case. Treaties are as valid today as they've always been.
Treaty people. Treaties include all people who live in a particular treaty, territory, or area. If you live on land governed by a treaty, or you are a descendant of a treaty person, you are also treaty.
And as stated in a previous slide, all treaty people have rights, but also responsibilities.
Indigenous peoples were already familiar with treaty processes and used them with one another for such things as peacekeeping, recoding significant agreements about sharing the land, and establishing mutually beneficial relationships.
A lot of these relationships between Indigenous groupings were based on trade needs, and also, though there were no borders, there were definitely boundaries for each set of people, and that's a part of what their treaty-making processes were about, and to be able to live with each other and beside one another in peace.
Indigenous cultures were shaped by their relationship to the land and their continuous evolution of their technology. All peoples had control over their own economies, decision-making, and processes for diplomacy and trade with others.
These relationships to their land were the most important things in their lives. These relationships were what taught them their cultures and taught them their whole way of life, from birth to death, from cradle to the grave. Their economies, wherever they lived, were varied all across the country. They're just very varied economies. Some economies depended a lot on agricultural activities. Some by the ocean depended mostly on fishing. Others in prairie areas, for example, was based mostly on hunting and traveling. All was very necessary in their lives.
As Europeans arrived and their settlement continued, treaties were negotiated that set out the terms for peace and friendship and military alliances. Where no treaty has been negotiated between the Indigenous peoples and the Crown, the land is considered Aboriginal title. It goes back to a document called the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and how it has been interpreted by the Supreme Court of Canada.
One of the most important parts of the Royal Proclamation for Indigenous people was a part that did not allow European powers to simply take land from any Indigenous people. That land had to be negotiated by treaty, and the terms were between the parties involved in that treaty-making process.
The Royal Proclamation included principles such as the decree that Indians should not be disturbed in their use and enjoyment of the lands reserved to them by the Royal Proclamation. First Nations lands can only be purchased by the Crown and not by individuals, and purchase could only happen with the consent of the Indians in a public assembly held by the governor or commander of chief in which the lands lay.
A lot of these old documents refer to Indigenous peoples as Indians, and a lot of the laws of the country still refer to us as Indians. For example, the Indian Act. I'd like you to be cognizant that we ourselves are trying to move away from that terminology, and as a part of respecting the names of what we call ourselves. And I just want to say that it's good to know that that is happening in the federal government level.
As European settlement continued, treaties were negotiated that set out the terms for peace and friendship and the sharing of the land. For the Europeans, treaties were about accessing land and resources as well as military alliances.
Okay, so we're looking at treaties from two different perspectives, and hopefully get to learn one another's perspectives.
The Indigenous leaders were dismayed and angered to discover that what was agreed leader to leader, nation to nation, was not recorded accurately. What was recorded in the written treaty was the surrender of their land.
In the Indigenous perspective, the land was never something that could be sold or given away. The land was something that you had a relationship with. And these perspectives were not accurately represented in the actual treaties. If you ever have the time to look at the minutes of the treaty-making process, you'll realize that what was agreed upon in the meeting was not what was represented in the actual treaty. Many times the treaties came to the meeting already typed up, and therefore totally not representing what was agreed upon in the actual negotiation.
The British North American Act, as well as the Constitution Act of 1867, put Indians and lands reserved for Indians under the control of the federal government. When this happened, Indigenous people lost their rights and control over their land. In 1867, all the laws dealing with Indigenous people were gathered together and put onto the Indian Act, which completely changed their lives. As long as cultures were strong, it was difficult for the government to take their lands away, so the Indian Act was used to weaken the people and their lands were taken.
One of the ways that they were able to force Indigenous communities and peoples into treaty-making process was to starve them. And a big example of this is in the prairies where the bison were killed, which was the main source of food for millions of people in the prairies. And when they became hungry, the federal government came and offered them rations of food every year. And that weakened the people, and it also gave the federal government an opportunity to put into practice other laws, such as the laws that required the taking of the children and taking them to residential schools, all of which weakened the people's culture.
Oberd McCurdy at a Crown First Nations gathering in 2012 made this statement. The way to repair the relations between us as Indigenous people and Canada is to have the country acknowledge that its richness and its wealth come from their one-sided interpretation of the treaties. There has to be, henceforth, a double understanding of what those treaties represent.
So one of the things that Oberd McCurdy always understood was that the Indigenous perspective of the treaties were not represented in any of the legal aspects at the federal level. And he's giving us this opportunity, or at that gathering in 2012, to begin the process of looking at Indigenous perspectives of the treaties.
By understanding the colonial history of Canada, we can renew our relationship with each other and move towards meaningful reconciliation.
What is often said by elders that we have to look at the past in order to live the present, to build towards the future.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada founded 10 principles of reconciliation, the first of which confirms the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. The other 9 of which can serve as guides to assist in repairing the damaged relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada.
The work of reconciliation in Canada has to begin with finding the truth, and that was one of the tasks that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada completed when they interviewed residential school survivors. And that was just the beginning of this process. That is ongoing, and that requires a lot of work from all of us.
So at the beginning of the presentation, we had asked you to think about your home, your family, and your community. And since going through the presentation, thinking about how that feels, or how that would have felt for our people when the lands were taken, when we were moved to a new area that was foreign to us, that maybe was a barren land that didn't provide for us what in the past had. Thinking about your children taken away from you, from your perspective as a parent or the child's perspective, where you're asked or you're told that what your culture was bad, what was Satanism, and thinking about what that would have done to you. Even your language was bad and was not allowed to be spoken. So just kind of really reflecting on your own personal thoughts and feelings of how that may have felt.
So we're finishing the webinar by giving you some homework. So in the community where you live, where you work, we'd like you to find out on whose traditional territory are you. And we'd also like you to list some of your treaty rights, but always remembering that rights don't come alone. Rights come with responsibilities. So make a list of what your treaty responsibilities could be.
So just wondering if there's, as we're wrapping up, if there's any questions, keeping in mind that this is a very brief information, that really this is just to spark some thoughts and discussions at your workplace, with your families, that you could, look more into. There's lots of things you can find on the web about the information we discussed today. So really, it was just like the start of your learning journey.
Any questions?
Suzanne,
Just to add,
do you
if
want to?
anybody would,
Yeah, thanks.
I was just going to say, if anybody would like to ask their question verbally rather than in the chat, just let me know. I can take you off mute. We have all sites muted for the recording, but I'd be happy to take anyone off mute.
Thank you. And if you don't have any questions today, we can certainly field your questions in the feedback that we'll be asking for when we send out a short survey link. So we do have one question here. And it says, thanks, Karen and Marnie. Just wondering where people can go to access treaties related to the communities they live in.
I think you can begin by Googling for that information.
I know, like in Treaty 3, for example, there's a Treaty 3 organization that, that if you contacted them, they would definitely put you in the right direction to find out more information. If you'd like to speak to somebody or get resources. Most treaty areas have a website.
I think that the map we were working on is a good place to start, where you look at where your dot is there's the name of the treaty area.
I'd also really like to encourage people, if you have the opportunity, to attend a blanket exercise in your area. It's a really excellent visual representation of the history of the Indigenous people of your area. I know some communities put them on if requested. There are facilitators that are trained, so if there's someone in your area that you'd like to bring in to do a blanket exercise, we can also send information about that as well, because I feel like that's a really excellent way to really not only just learn about the history of the people, but you actually get to almost like it's like you're walking through history. So it's more of a, how would you say, like a, participatory way of learning.
And if you're interested in getting a blanket exercise organized, they need to have at least 25 people to make the blanket exercise really work and resonate.
Excellent. I just wanted to make note that Jane Vach has put into the chat pod a link on Ontario treaties for anybody that's interested. And then we have another question. At corporate, we are not that exposed to First Nations Inuit Métis community. How can we help?
Where are you?
At the corporate office in Markham. This is what the Aprita is saying. Any thoughts on that?
Well, Toronto has a wealth of information. I think contacting any of the universities in their Indigenous studies. Also that Toronto itself has the National Canadian, I'm not sure, Aboriginal Center. We can get the proper name of that to you, and also the address and phone number if anybody's interested.
Sure, we'll be able to provide that information
Okay.
to corporate staff.
Just
Frieda's asking again, what can we do to make the First Nations Inuit Métis teams work easier? I think that's a beautiful question. From our end, I think that this, Frieda, this is just the first step in sharing knowledge and really bringing some more Indigenous cultures to corporate. So what we'd like to do is to really bring about more knowledge and provide more knowledge sharing opportunities to not just learn about the program, but to learn about Indigenous cultures. So thank you for that. And stay tuned as we go through the next year. We'll be providing more opportunities to connect with us and to share that information through social media and all those avenues and venues. So thanks for that question.
Doris, I just would like to also go back to that question about what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would encourage people to just be more aware of what's going on in our country in regards to Indigenous people. Even like CBC has their own webpage about Indigenous issues. I think they still call it Aboriginal, but if you just Google CBC Aboriginal, and just being aware about what's going on in Canada with our people. Also, things like attending a powwow. We actually just hosted our 16th annual traditional powwow here in Red Lake. We had lots of allies come to our powwow. They volunteer, they help us run the powwow. We had flag bearers that were non-Indigenous carry flags at our grand entry, and just really kind of looking out there and seeing how you can support Indigenous communities or Indigenous people individually. So I just really encourage you to check out, maybe is there a powwow happening as a start, just to find out, what's going on in your area. There's lots and lots of teachings that happen at powwows. So just encouraging people to check that out as a way to start learning more about our history and our people. Anything else to add?
Yeah, on the question about Markham, the Kairos Center is in Toronto, and that's the organization that started the blanket exercise, and it might be a good idea to visit the Kairos office.
Excellent idea. Thank you, Karen. I don't see any other questions on the screen, on the chat pod, so I just want to say thank you so much. Yes, you've got Miigwech up on the screen, so thank you, Marnie and Karen. Suzanne, if you want to give the screen back to me, I'll just put up our last slide.
You get the pop-up, Doris? There we go.
There we go. Thank you. So I just want to say miigwech to Karen and Marnie for sharing your knowledge with us today, and really in recognition of all of our roles as treaty people. So proud to be a part of this, and so proud to be a part of the team and the work that SC Health is doing. And I want to really acknowledge all of SC staff, everybody that's joined us today. It's important that we take these opportunities to learn and to share and to grow with each other. So thank you so much. And soon you'll receive a link from us, a short survey about the webinar today. We'd like you to fill that in. And if you'd like more information, our website link is there. And of course, you can always find us through the SC Health website as well. And my contact information is there, but you can reach out to any of the First Nations Inuit Métis program team members for questions and support. We're all open. We'd love to hear from you, so please don't hesitate to contact us directly with any of your questions or comments or suggestions on how to share and bring more information to SE Health. So with that, miigwech. Have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.